Happy South by Southwest. Happy Monday. Is it Monday? Tuesday? What day is it? Monday?
Monday.
Happy Monday. I don't have a voice, which means I'm at South by Southwest. My name is Brian Pageau. I am president of a company called Foresight. We're based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I can talk more about Foresight in a minute. But welcome to the Greening of the Midwest panel. The distinguished group of folks here that's going to join me. And we're going to talk for about 45 minutes about what we're doing around electrification in the Midwest and from various perspectives. And then there'll be some Q&A at the end. So welcome. If you can't hear in the back, give us a wave or just move to the front and we'll jump in. So we're going to start with introductions. I've asked everybody to tell a little bit of their personal background, how they got here, and then jump in a little bit about what their organization is doing. And then we'll take it from there. Okay? Cool. So, Ben, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Brian. Ben Richardson, a little bit of a mixed background. I started out in the military, did about 6 years, then worked in finance for a bit, then went down and worked in public policy in D.C., and then helped out start a number of energy projects with the Biden administration and with Defense Innovation Unit. And that led me to Our Next Energy, which is where I'm at now, which is a startup based in Novi, Michigan. And we are building cells and packs for the consumer EVs, commercial EVs, class 3 through 6 trucks, and we just announced our new grid product. So growing company, we have our first factory is in Van Buren Township, which we can talk more about, and the growth of that as we build out the factory and the group there, and really just bringing back kind of the green industries, bringing that to the Midwest and growing that in Michigan.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Kathryn?
Yeah, hi everyone. Kathryn Snorrason. I am the Interim Chief Mobility Officer with the State of Michigan's Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. Quick background, I graduated from the University of Michigan, go blue, and then went to Deloitte Consulting for a few years, international development, and then economic development for the city of Chicago. But you're going to do economic development for anywhere. It's going to be for your home state, for Michigan. So I got to come back home, work with Trevor Paul, focus on mobility and electrification for the past 5 years. In our office, our mission is to create a stronger state economy in the state to support safer, more equitable, and environmentally conscious transportation. And we are such a unique bird within government. We get to do that because we are created by the governor's office, but we're a collaboration across 4 state agencies. So that means that, MDOT doesn't have their own mobility office, or EGLE or LEO or MEDC. We are a collaboration across all 4. Which means we get to work with MEDC on economic development, MDOT on infrastructure, LEO on labor, and EGLE, our Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, on everything we're here to talk about today, the environment. And it's all of this, our office's state strategy around mobility, our My Healthy Climate Plan, all leads up to support the Governor Whitmer's goal to be carbon neutral across the state by 2050. So really excited to work with the companies on stage here and talk to you more about our office.
Good morning. My name's Taffe. We're all apparently tied to Michigan. I grew up in Michigan, also went to University of Michigan. Didn't know you had. But after that, I actually went out to California. I graduated in engineering, spent over 20 years at a company called Cypress Semiconductor. So I went to Silicon Valley right out of college. And then after about 20 plus years at that company, kind of decided I want to do something different and frankly, something a little more impactful to the world. So I joined SunPower about 10 years ago, which remains today the second largest solar company in the United States. And I spent most of my time there running the residential business, which is a phenomenal job and a great company. And I still feel that way. And I loved what we did, and I became much more over time focused on what can we do about what I really believe is the problem of our generation, which is climate change and what we can do about it. So I just 6 months ago, I had an opportunity to go run a very large business at Generac, which is in Wisconsin, and we think of it as more of a traditional old school manufacturing company. Frankly, 60 years with almost all the money coming from combustion engines. But I was very impressed by the leadership's decision that they're not going to, because it's the right thing to do, they're going to invest heavily in the transition toward sustainable energies, and because it's the right business decision, that eventually the business that's based on combustion engines is going to go away and it's going to be replaced by electrification. So instead of letting that happen to them, they decided to be very, very aggressive They've spent over $1 billion in the last 4 years on acquisitions. I've just came in with a pretty significant team from the solar and the battery industry to effectively bring those together such that we could be a leader in that transition to electrification for business and for societal reasons.
Nice. Thanks, Norm, Kathryn, Ben. Great to meet you all. Thanks for being here. Like I said, my name is Brian. I work at a company called Foresight. We do energy and sustainability consulting for businesses. A lot of our clients are mid-market folks, not the biggest companies in the world, but a lot of the suppliers to the biggest companies in the world. And effectively, we're doing energy and sustainability work on behalf of our clients in a variety of ways: carbon accounting, sustainability reporting, life cycle assessments on products, energy efficiency and renewable energy in buildings are all the things that my team does. I went to school to be a history teacher and coach high school basketball, so it makes sense that I'm doing this and moderating the panel mostly. I'm definitely supposed to be the question asker here versus these fine people. I think one of the, and we all know this, but I think one of the unexpected things around when we think about like climate change and the work being done in this space is I think we think of the coasts and we don't think of the Midwest as playing a big part in that transition, and that is not the case. And so I think we're gonna get in a little bit around like why each of these organizations cares about this and why the Midwest made sense for them to have a presence and to do this work. And so, Ben, you're part of a startup. Like, what's the story? Like, why Michigan? You live in California. I mean, why is the company doing anything in the Midwest and in Michigan?
I wasn't going to tell everybody I lived in California, so that was on you. So yeah. Well, I'll start macro and then talk more specifics. I mean, Michigan is a place where you go. The Midwest is a place where you go when you're thinking about building things at scale, and it has a good history of that. There's a 100-year history of production there and growing things and scaling things up. At more the micro level or specific level, our founder, Majib Ijaz, he has an interesting career, right? He was at Ford, he was at A123, and then he went to Apple. And when he made the decision to found the company, he was out in California, and he had to make the decision: does he found it in California? Does he come bring it back to Michigan? And it was the talent pool from his time at A123 and Ford which brought him back there to be able to tap into that. He was building batteries with A123 back in the early 2000s and building smaller factories than the gigafactories we're building now. With that same talent pool of individuals that knew that piece of it, but that knew how to build factories, were there. So he really returned to go back to his roots. And obviously there's some connections to kind of our focus on consumer EVs, but it had a lot more to do with where he had his team that he's worked on previously and how to build out that team, and then looking at opportunities again with kind of macro, the history of Michigan and history of Michigan kind of building out and having large factories.
Yeah. Eventually, you have to make something, and we can do that. Yeah,
that's a key part of it. You usually don't make a lot of money unless you can make something.
Yeah,
right?
Eventually, right? Yeah, and I think sort of the inverse, like starting up something from scratch and choosing the Midwest for the reasons that you articulated is cool. But then there's like Norm, like Generac, like the story there, like it's a 60-year-old business, old school combustion engine powered business, right? And so what an amazing innovation story, right? Like you're working really hard to not be Kodak right now, right? And
exactly.
Which is like a huge other kind of challenge. So expound on that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good kind of analogy. Really think about it is here you have a company that's very, very successful in really resiliency. What Generac's all about is effectively homeowners the power can go out, and then they are by far and away the number one solution for homeowners to have backup power. Historically, that backup power has been fossil fuel based, whether it be diesel or natural gas solutions. But to them, the most important thing is when the power goes out, you've still got power. And they've been very, very successful, and they continue. That's continues to be a very important business. But at the same time, what they saw is that the world's going to transition, and whether it be fully in 5 or 10 years from now, at some point, batteries are effectively a better solution, not just because they're better for the environment, but over time, particularly with the massive efforts coming on and bringing the costs of batteries down by vehicles driven by that, it's also becoming a more cost-effective solution. So just from a pure business perspective, they saw it as both an opportunity and a threat. The other thing is, Generac, there's the home side of the business, which is substantial, but also the same thing applies in the industrial space. So they're a very large supplier of backup solutions for all the way up to utility scale, but a lot of commercial industries. But for the very same reasons, as batteries get bigger, denser, and cheaper, we want to be at the forefront of that transition to hold our business. And then kind of the comment made about factories, Wisconsin has, or Generac has 5 significant factories throughout the state of Wisconsin today. We want to eventually find a way to transition them as well, to keep that manufacturing base we think is a great strength of ours, but then leverage it as we move toward an electrified and cleaner environment.
Nice. And so you guys are both tied to battery and additional things, Norm, Generac's business. The mobility landscape, and Kathryn, you touched on it a little bit, how I love the different departments that you guys are cross-functional around. And I think, so if Kodak had thought of themselves as being in the business of, helping people capture memories, they might not have held on to what tools they were building for others to do that. And I feel like that's the story of the automotive industry, is waking up and being oh, we're actually not in the car business, we're in the mobility business. And so from a policy and government standpoint, how are you guys making it easy for folks like Norm and Ben to want to do business in Michigan and other Midwest states doing similar things? So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So to get at that larger question, there's not one industry or one player that's going to, solve it for everyone. It really is a complicated approach. And so here at the state, we're starting with a state strategy, but then that state strategy is supported by the executive budget we see from the state, the federal dollars we're getting, and then really unique partnerships, making sure we're building public-private partnerships to help companies like the ones on stage see that future here in Michigan and the Midwest. So just a few examples, around starting with the state strategy. Both the My Healthy Climate Plan announced in April of 2022, led by Eagle, and the My Future Mobility Plan. And My stands for MI. It's not mine personally. I feel like it looks better on paper when you see MI versus when you say it on a panel. Both those plans are to support that carbon neutrality goal by 2050. And 2 goals I wanted to call out in the mobility plan that's tied to electrification as well is Michigan is working toward, across the state, introducing 100,000 EV chargers in the state of Michigan by 2030 to support 2 million electric vehicles on our roads. And then also ensuring we have the right structure that 80% of the charging can happen off-peak to minimize the impacts to the grid. So those are the 2 specific goals that we're working on across the state. And then to support that, it's all, goes back to budget. So 110 million from NEVI, federal dollars, 25 million from the Mobility Futures Initiative, and then the governor has 65 million in her executive 2024 budget for this year for the electric vehicle infrastructure. And it's so great that we're on a stage about the Midwest and not just Michigan, because we also saw that it's not just about building out the infrastructure in the state, but ensuring we're partnering with other states in the Midwest to build out those charging corridors. So we do have an MOU with 4 other states in the Midwest called Rev Midwest to focus on EV adoption here in the Midwest. And then also an MOU with 7 states focused on the hydrogen economy as well. So it's not just about electric, but hydrogen, and looking at all those alternative fuel options that companies are chasing to ensure we're reaching that carbon neutrality goal. I could go on for 10 more minutes, but I'll let us go to other topics.
I mean, if you're inspired, that's why we're here. But
Yeah.
go ahead, Ben.
I'll just
Please,
make a little bit of a comment and an endorsement for the state of Michigan and MEDC. I mean, they've been a huge partner for our Next Energy as we've grown. Not only from an incentive standpoint, I talked before about we decided to headquarters the company in Michigan, and that was obvious with a lot of the ties with our founder to Michigan. But I mean, we did have different options for where to put the factory, and you know, a lot of the incentives were similar in different states, but it was also like trying to find the facility, working through a lot of the zoning and other issues associated with that. So you know, when Kathryn talks about like having that centralized team on mobility in the state of Michigan, it's been very helpful to us to be able to have one team to engage with at the state level and be able to help work across those different issues. So, you know, we're very much an example of how effective that is, and it's helped move us forward. And I've mentioned the fact that we're building a factory. You know, it's in Van Buren Township in Michigan, which is kind of southwest of Detroit. And that first factory is like, it'll start production this year, going into next year, and scale up in 24 into 25, and that's about 112 jobs if I get the number right. I mean, that's a significant, and that's just our first factory, and we've already started working towards our second factory for the state of Michigan, and we're also, you know, at the very early stages of our third. But you know, these are real numbers when you talk about jobs and kind of growth.
I think the construct of like the grid readiness for all the EVs is something you probably can all touch on, and this is a question for whoever wants to take it, but like I'm not in your business like you guys are, but I know enough folks to have articulated like the issue is not so much consumers wanting to buy EVs like long term. It's really about like, can the grid and the infrastructure to support all of that load change essentially like happen fast enough and in enough time. Like a lot of things, like when consumers take over and markets take over, like things happen fast, but government doesn't always work at the same pace, or never works at the same pace, maybe somewhere between always and never. So anyways, I don't care who takes it, but like what are the opportunities or challenges or things that you guys are seeing from your perspectives around like the infrastructure and the grid side related to this transition?
Yeah, I could take a first stab. And I will say, when the governor created our office back in 2020, my former boss, Trevor Paul, very much created this culture of startup within government, which makes no sense when you say it out loud. But on the inside, we really want to find a way to remove that red tape, those barriers for companies to grow in Michigan, and just accelerate innovation, and for Michigan to be seen as a place where that can happen. But to your question on infrastructure and the grid, I think a huge piece that we're focused on in Michigan is testing new technology that can address some of those challenges with the impacts on our grid. So we've been able to create new test sites specifically focused on electrification. One of them is called the Detroit Smart Parking Lab, and this is a public-private partnership. This is the magic of bringing the two sides together. And it's a partnership between Bosch, Ford, Bedrock, and the state of Michigan, where companies can come and test their electric vehicle technology in a parking lab in Detroit. We have the American Center of Mobility represented here with Ruben, so please talk to Ruben about what he's doing around hydrogen. But Michigan is a great place where companies can come, test that technology to address some of those challenges around the grid and the infrastructure. And one of them I'll call out is also Electrion. So MDOT has a contract with Electrion to test inductive charging in Michigan and static charging in Detroit. And there's already use cases to start testing that out at test sites, but then build it into a mile stretch in Detroit where we can use a shuttle around Michigan Central to test out what that looks like. And then even further than that, we want to start with testing, but then scale it. So we have an MOU where MDOT's going to work with Electrion to explore what does inductive charging look like across the state, because testing's great, but what do you do after the test? So scalability is very key.
Do people know what inductive charging is? It's okay to raise your hand if you don't. Does everybody give me a general? So someone because this is cool.
Yeah.
Like, go ahead, describe what inductive charging is.
Yeah, if anyone here is from Electrion, please raise your hand, and you can always correct me. But basically, as you drive over these coils that are under the roadway, your vehicle is charged as you drive over them. Obviously, your vehicle, your shuttle, transit, needs to be outfitted with the right receiver to receive that charge. And then they also will have pads, so as the shuttle is stopped, receiving passengers onto the shuttle, there's also that static charging pad as well.
Yeah, so effectively, like skipping over the charging station
Not
concept.
Not plugging in.
You just drive. So, anyways, go ahead, Norm.
Yeah, that is cool. Just back to the topic about sort of the challenges I think you're absolutely right. The biggest challenge as we transition to electrification is going to be infrastructure related and just the ability for it to absorb. The great news about electrification is it's the clearest way to truly impact climate change the fastest. If you look at what's causing climate change or the amount of essentially fuels or into the atmosphere or carbon in the atmosphere, 75% of it's based on energy. So if you can simply electrify everything and then source electricity from wind and solar or renewable sources or even nuclear, you really attack in one way 75% of the problem. And the other good news there is of all the challenges with climate change, that's actually the one we have the best solutions for, right? Wind and solar are now the cheapest forms of energy by far. They've surpassed natural gas in the last 3 or 4 years, and they just keep going down because the marginal cost, of course, is zero, right? Nobody owns the sun or the wind, so as long as you now they're not firm, and that's a big problem. So you have to have other technologies like batteries, but it is the best way to get there. And then what's happened on the other side, on the consumption side, of course, is electric vehicles are a massively important answer. Starting in 2018, I believe, cars became the largest polluter on Earth is vehicles. Well, now we have a solution to make cars not pollute. Again, as long as you can source the energy originally from it, you have a real path. So there's reason to be optimistic. Now, I think the big challenge is going to be that as you start to charge vehicles, you start to do so much electrified in the home, everything else, how does the grid respond to that? One of the other acquisitions that Generac made in the last few years was a company called Enbala. And what they do is essentially grid services software which help utilities to essentially bring in renewables in an intentional way and deal with the fact that it causes a lot of disruption to the grid, particularly because the energy is not produced on a firm basis. It's produced when it's sunny or when it's windy, and that makes it more complex. But there are real solutions with that, solutions from a software perspective for utilities, and then the other solution is the fact that as homeowners start to do their own energy, solar, batteries locally, the grid can actually take advantage of that. And at some point when you have a very large battery under your car in most garages, that's another capability that the utilities can actually take advantage to smooth out, kind of as a resource that they can access. I'd say one of the challenges is, not to bang on utilities, is that utilities aren't always that motivated to enable that, right? There's a mix. I mean, the utilities, frankly, are monopolies that see homeowners with their own grid capability as competitors. And so one of the big challenges is, and this is a government and a utility challenge, is to get a utility business model which actually encourages them to use those resources. Too many utilities, frankly, are paid to add capacity, to add generation, when really we want the opposite. We want them not adding generation, but to use the generation that's out there. We still got a lot of work to do there. Very dependent on what state and what utility, but there's a lot of work to make sure utilities kind of come in line to help the problem.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, and there's some great segues there. When Our Next Energy was founded, it was 3 main principles that we were founded on. It was doubling the range of EVs, the safety of battery and battery chemistries, and looking for more sustainable supply chains. So on that first one, on doubling the range, we've demonstrated that. About a year ago, we took our battery pack, we put it into a Tesla Model S, and we got 752 miles out of one charge, which is pretty impressive and obviously got a lot of news for us. But when you put that in the context of what Norm was just talking about with how much energy you're storing in your vehicles, we are definitely designing our battery packs, both for some of our full LFP, and I don't want to get into large conversations about battery chemistries up here, or the dual chemistry packs that we have for these longer range. We're looking at...
I think people are excited about battery chemistry right now, right? Say more.
We start getting into these 400, 600-mile range vehicles, which we're already demonstrating with our vehicles today. You get into a different conversation about how much you need to recharge, when you need to recharge, how inductive charging works for that, and then the vehicle actually being part of the grid infrastructure and thinking of it as part of that. So that's one big piece of that. And as I mentioned, we are getting into grid, which we announced recently, and we are getting into commercial vehicles and having additional storage in those commercial vehicles. And you're thinking about when are they being used, when are they not being used, last mile type stuff. It all kind of comes back to that. A second point on this is, DTE has been a great partner for us in Detroit. Kind of going back to the Michigan and the partnerships there. They've been a great partnership with our factory as we've been building out and looking at different ways to look at our factory as a source for them. both from a grid storage perspective and as we produce batteries there. I won't get too much into that, but that's another part of the partnership there. And then lastly, I mentioned that we recently got into grid storage, and so us being part of that and offering a 2, a 3, and a 6 megawatt kind of containerized box that can be used at different things. And there's kind of that medium ground that's kind of missing in that. There's a lot of like large grid storage projects, and there's a lot of like kind of at the home type stuff, but it's kind of in that middle, that substation level area that's also an opportunity to go after that we're looking at right now. And our first big partnership in the grid space was with Berkshire Hathaway, again, Midwest. So we've got some partnerships with them, and we'll keep kind of growing out the business from there.
Yeah, macro, if we think about like 100+ years ago when we decided to give monopolies to utilities, it made a lot of sense, right? Like a lot of systems we design after 100 years, maybe that doesn't make as much sense, right? We didn't want 1,000 power companies running their lines all over our towns. It literally would have been a bad idea, right? So it was a good idea 100 to 150 years ago to centralize power around utilities. They're regulated, but they're effectively regulated monopolies for the most part. And so a lot of the opportunities and the challenges are just sort of based in unbundling that business model, more or less, right? And there's a lot of like miniature solutions and parts and pieces to that, and even more complicated than this, and I think a lot of people don't have a good appreciation for it, is like a lot of these utilities are connected to each other through other like interconnected other utilities and grids. So like everybody is like sort of connected, but not really, and everybody's got different state regulations. And so when you have things like in Texas, here, we're in Texas, by the way, where they're deregulated in electricity, which they have like great electric pricing as a result of that, but then you have like not as much oversight and assurance, and like the black swan, whatever that thing was called a few years ago, where the black swan event, where all of a sudden like the whole place shut down because there wasn't as much oversight on the regulation side, right? And so like a lot of these like big government, small government sorts of conversations and swings is what everybody here is, to one degree or another, sort of attempting to solve for. And they can be accelerants. The utilities and state governments can be accelerants and deterrents, depending on motivations. But to your point, Norm, earlier, what a lot of people don't, I think, have an appreciation for is like publicly available utilities where you can buy their stock. They never sort of like don't make money. It was like sort of guaranteed. So, they were good investments. Well, when they really want to like their business model and incentive structure, basically they were only really allowed to make money when they built new power. So like if you're only allowed to make money on building new generation and you don't need as much, or it doesn't make as much economic sense, like then they may or may not want to do that. And so there's so many like downstream ripple effects of just pure like incentive structure around those utilities that goes back 100+ years. So anyways, for those of you who are like me and close to like kindergarten level, maybe that makes more sense now, because it is like there are a lot of things and opportunities that happen inside of that construct.
Yeah, and I'll wear a slightly different hat here a little bit, because I mentioned before I helped do some work with DoD, Department of Defense, and Defense Innovation Unit, and there's this whole trend line in distributed energy resources, this DER kind of concept, and that's what's happening right now with kind of this shift in the utilities and kind of their role and their function here, where you have all these different technologies that are coming on board for these distributed energy resources out there, where you don't necessarily need as many lines, you don't necessarily need as many large power producing facilities for generation. You can do it at smaller scale. You can store it at different locations. So it's really producing a different model that's a challenge for all of us, both at the consumer level and at the state level, and the utilities if you're trying to figure out their role there. But when I was at Defense Innovation Unit, that was the challenge: look for commercial technologies, and that was the trend line that I was seeing in the commercial space, with different technologies coming on board that could be adopted by the military. Because when we deploy, think of a disaster relief or something like that, we're not going to necessarily be hooked into a large grid. How do we operate with distributed energy resources where we can get generation from somewhere and then be able to move that around effectively, which is what's happening now with vehicles and generators and everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add to that on, one way we're solving for that, the challenges we've seen is having more groups talk to each other more frequently in Michigan. So our office has a programming side that I talked a little bit about with, the testing and the grants and partnerships, but we also, half of our office focuses on the policy side. And so what that means is we have a council on future mobility and electrification in the state, where we have public and private sector players, including our utilities, and something we have in Michigan called the MPSC, Michigan Public Service Commission. It's the regulating body over our utilities, who hear these rate cases from DTE and consumers. We have them in these council meetings where we're talking about these challenges in the industry and what policies we can build in Michigan as first policies to really lead in the industry and overcome some of these challenges. So I think a big thing is just we're ensuring the right people are in the room, talking to each other, addressing the challenges, and then tackling it from both a policy perspective and working with our legislators on that. And then when we can, filter it to the program side as well for the testing and grants and partnerships.
One of the things I just add to what Ben said too on, distributed energy resources. The good news on this side is that resources that are distributed, like whether it be solar or battery at your home or in a business, et cetera, also are just innately more efficient. If you're closer to where you generate the energy or store the energy to where you use the energy, you don't have any losses along transmission lines, et cetera, and you effectively are making the energy more effective than any other centrally done. And you said it right. They built the original structures about 100 years ago, and there was never a concept of any of this. So it was built around a model which for sure made sense and will always make sense as part of the solution, but made sense as the only solution. But now we really need an organization which has natural inertia from hundreds of years to think differently about how can I take advantage of the fact. And what I think is going to happen is because the need's going to become so great so fast, even if there are business model issues, the utilities I have noticed have really started to change their tune to realize, I would call it kind of a lesser of two evils. Number one, the utility has to keep the power on if at all possible. And in the last 10 years, there's been a lot more essentially power outages across the country throughout. And so that's kind of problem one. Problem two was I'm an investor-owned utility, and I want to build because of that. So, but now what they're realizing is even if they were to build at an aggressive pace, they're not going to be able to deal with this change. So what they're starting to do, I think, is realize, hey, the lesser of two evils is to find a way to really use these distributed resources to encourage them, because they give them way more flexibility in reacting to things. They don't need to have build a peaker plant if they can just take advantage of storage in locations. And then you mentioned the interconnectedness of network. That's also going to be very important. A lot of your energy today, if California's having trouble, they may actually get their energy from, even though CAISO is connected to about 7 states in the West, and they will move that energy around. That's actually very good to eliminate the need to build extra plants, because you can just smooth out across a larger audience or a larger customer base. So those two things, interconnectivity and then using distributed resources, are one of the ways we'll do this transition and end up with a cleaner environment.
Very cool. So, and tied to sort of the policy side and some of these like large structural things that have been in place 100 years, I think it's less so now, but this used to be like politics sort of like co-opted this conversation. And Norm, you and I were talking last night, and it's like it shouldn't have ever been, and then it was for a minute, and it doesn't. It feels like that's like sort of shifted, right? And so like I think that this is like, to me, what's most exciting is like there is, we can be motivated by different things, but in this instance, in a world where there's not a lot of like people like wanting to like find common ground, this is actually a thing that everybody wants, like clean air, clean water, like healthy humans, a flourishing environment are all things that everybody wants, and there's just so much pun intended green space to work together on it. And so to me, that's like the most exciting part about this is I don't care what you're motivated by, like we're all working on the same stuff, which is doesn't always shake out that way. So anyways, you guys can riff on that, or like I'd like to hear from each of you about like what are you most excited about as we take these next steps in this transition.
Yeah, I'll just comment because on that conversation, I do think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, and I think this has really changed. I agree with you. In the last 5 years, I think the partisanship has really dissipated a little bit. Everyone kind of agreeing that yes, one, it's a real problem. Two, we can do things about it. The other thing I think that's changed is, in the end, it often gets driven by economics. So if people have to make a choice that says, hey, I know it's good for the environment, but I have to pay a little more, you can only get so much momentum. What's happened in the last really 5 to 10 years is the cleanest solutions have become the cheapest solutions. And that has really driven momentum across the board. Energy generation, the electric vehicle, if you don't have an electric vehicle, I recommend one. But if you ride them, now what we see is that there is no trade-off in performance except it's incredible performance. But at the same time, the fact is an electric engine is a cheaper form of engines. And what you're going to see is, I completely applaud Detroit for en masse moving over to electric engines. But in the future, a lot of that's driven by the fact, though, that it's a way more inexpensive way and a more efficient way to generate motion. And you just see that if you get an electric vehicle, you kind of realize there's no liquids, right? There, you open the car, the only liquid in the entire car is your windshield washer fluid, right? There's no transmission. There's no. If you think of all the parts that go out and the maintenance, it's really a better way. And I give a lot of credit to really Tesla for kind of waking the world up to that you didn't have to have a compromise. You'd have an incredible performance car that also happened to be very, very low on maintenance. And so now what you see is the economics are driving, in addition to doing the right thing for the world, now you have a real economic motivation to move in mass. And that's what makes me very optimistic. I think there's so much momentum around electrification, and there's so much value, both for the world and for the consumer. I feel like there's incredible momentum that I haven't seen before.
Yeah, I'll just kind of hit on that too. There's no more debate in the numbers, right? I mean, it's cheaper to build a solar farm than it is to do a coal plant. No matter which way you estimate that, look at the total cost, look at the amount of cost per megawatt or whatnot. All those debates are over. It is cheaper to build that now. So the remaining piece of that was kind of the duck curve, if you kind of understand that concept, or that intermittency of what's related to solar. So how do you have to solve that, which was with batteries? And now that battery storage is kind of coming online, that's kind of fixing that issue. So once you've got battery storage, you're getting 12 plus hours and you've got it's cheaper to build out the solar farm than the coal plant. It just doesn't make any sense but to move down that path. It doesn't matter where you stand on the political side or what you think of climate change. It just doesn't make you're just literally wasting money by making some of the fossil fuel focused generation options there. And then that's why the other point I want to make on the policy side is the Inflation Reduction Act. It's kind of a once in a lifetime, and that's really enabling these things by bringing down the cost in lots of different ways. But now you're talking about the incentives at the cell and pack manufacturing upstream, or with the different incentives they've put in there, with grid storage. So as that comes online, and as we get the rules kind of put in place with that, it's going to really keep increasing. The momentum's already there with the law being passed, but with the implementation law coming, in the next 6 months to a year, and the momentum's just going to keep growing. Prices are going to go down. This gets back to the Midwest thing, being good at producing things at scale. Once you start producing things at scale, things get cheaper to build, and you're just going to keep seeing that cost come down, and then you're off to the races. There's just no way of going back at that point.
Yeah, and we were talking about this last night, Norm, a little bit. And even if there was like a political party change in 24, apparently everybody is pumped about the IRA, like whether they'll say it publicly or not. Like it's gonna, in 10 years we're gonna look back and it's gonna be a huge moment in time, and it's not gonna be something that people are gonna try and walk away from. It sounds like. So, Kathryn.
Oh, I just wanted to add, you were asking, what we're excited about as we look toward the future. And I think, a lot of this conversation, which makes sense, has been focused on vehicles that we drive every day. But there's absolutely a multimodal focus here for electrification. So we've seen a lot of companies with scooters, bikes, wheelchairs, you name it, any form of transportation moving to electric. And then the infrastructure solutions following that as well. We're proud to have a company called Commute out of Flint, who has a multimodal charging station. And so I'm just excited to remove one of the biggest problems we see today, which is range anxiety, and just that infrastructure is available. It's something people don't even think about anymore when they get on an electric vehicle, whatever that might be, from scooter to car to public transit.
The other, I think, market that's ancillary, I'm glad you brought that up a little bit, is I also think the electrification of the home is becoming bigger and bigger. So things like heat pumps are becoming much more popular, much more efficient, and much more controllable. You're going to see a lot more, I'd say, load control in the home where, even today, like an Ecobee or a Nest thermostat can control loads. That can be drawn on by the utility. When they're in a danger point, they can actually adjust the temperature of homes and kind of without you noticing and all that kind of stuff, but it gives you real capability to make adjustments to the biggest loads in your home, which are your AC kind of loads. I think you see more of that as people get electric charging in the home. That's going to be another huge load source, which is controllable. You don't have to charge in the middle of the day. You can charge at night. That kind of flexibility and intelligence in the home is going to make the home much more of a controllable resource, help us with the transition, but also end up saving money. You will save money over time the more electric it goes as you cover the initial investment. Things become cheaper and cheaper, just like LED lighting became both cheaper and saved a ton of energy. You'll see a lot more of that happen in the home, not just in the vehicles.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
And I'll just add, when you were talking about some of the politics, in this area, I joined, our Next Energy because I wanted to be part of the energy transition. I cared about national security, a lot of my background, and I wanted to help with the creation of jobs. On that second point, and by the way, we got number 3 in Forbes best startups in 2023. Just throwing that out there. But that was on Tuesday this last week. Busy week. But on that regard, like energy security, energy independence, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. That's the other side of the argument, right, from the politics of it. And unfortunately, we're seeing that play out in real time in Europe right now, and it's a very unfortunate event, but it is bringing that reality to all of us. And so I don't see any changes from the politics on this side, because being able to build out our ability here not to be dependent on energy imported in, it will matter a lot, and that's where you get to these like large plants we're going to build out, and solar and everything else.
Yeah, I think that the technology, the connectedness between the technology advancements and like the shift towards more local is very real, and tied to Kathryn, your point around like more, it's more than cars, like other ways of getting around. Think about like work from home, like now, like your home is your power company, is your office is where you live, and then how you get around your community might not only be, a lot of people might not need cars as much anymore, right? And so like all of these things are very connected relative to just how we live and work and all of this stuff. And the electrification piece is a huge unlock of all of that. And that's what I mean by, Ben, your point. Like, I don't care what you're motivated by, like the work is the same. And all the motivations are great for coming from different perspectives, which is cool. Like, again, there's not a lot of things in the world that we can all rally around, and this is one of those things, in my opinion. So cool. So we're right on time for Q&A. If people have questions for us, we've got a variety of resources here to field questions. Yes. Oh, you know what? There's going to be a mic that comes around. Wow.
My question is for Kathryn in particular, but anyone is welcome to weigh in. So we've talked about personal EVs for the bulk of this panel, but I'm an organizer with Better Street Chicago, and we know that we have to move people away from cars, just generally speaking, to really have a green future. Electric vehicles are heavier, they tear up the roads, they're also more deadly towards pedestrians because they are so much heavier. So what is your office doing to build out public transit?
Yeah, we're really lucky to have the MDOT Office of Passenger Transit that we work really closely with, and that's also part of the structure of our office to align with MDOT and her office. That's Jean Russman over there. And so, the focus there is really on public transit and how to ensure those options are electric as well. So I know they've been rolling out public buses across the state. Detroit's been slowly increasing the number of electric buses that they offer. And we hope passengers don't even notice, right? They're just continuing to use the service as is, and it's just moving toward electric, supporting the state's carbon neutrality goal. And we're continuing to work with not only MDOT, Office of Passenger Transit, but the utilities as well to increase the number of buses that are electric across the state.
Okay, hi. I'm Jim Hoteri. I'm one of the founders of Holland, Michigan-based LilyPad Labs. So we're a developer of solar-powered boats that are designed for the sharing economy. Recreational boating is super dirty, right? 20 pounds of CO2 per mile, directly putting the emissions into the water. Given that Michigan is one of the biggest boating states, tell me a little more about the programs and things and your thoughts on how to green the boating industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And Charlie Tyson, can I call you out? Can you raise your hand in the back? All right. Everyone who's interested in multimodal charging, please talk to Charlie afterwards. He's been a really big leader in the state of Michigan around this, specifically boating, and ensuring that our maritime community is seeing the benefits of electrification and solar power energy. So not only working with LilyPad, which is a great example of our grant program that we offer to companies, we ensure companies who have innovative solutions in Michigan that want to test it out, prove themselves, to advance themselves to the next level. We offer grants to ensure they can do that. And our office has that focus on multimodal, including maritime technology. So we are looking at charging stations for boats and building out a corridor around that in northern Michigan. But Charlie's your man if you want to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we do have one of our initial customers was an electric boat company, so we have a version of our battery pack that does support that industry.
There's also sails that I believe wind-powered boats. Any other questions? Brandon.
Hi, my question's mostly for Ben and Kathryn around the federal government and even the Army and opportunities and relationships there. So in Detroit is the Ground Vehicle Systems Center, which is responsible for all of DoD's kind of R&D work around vehicles, right? And with the shift that you're seeing around GM and then GM Defense and those relationships, so the state's opportunity to engage in dual use around military, obviously the Biden administration is doing all the signals about a transition that's going to happen there as well. And so between you two, just your thoughts about the opportunity that Michigan has to be a leader in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you asking this question too, because it's an area that we want to focus on in the future, and it's actually part of the governor's executive budget recommendation for fiscal year 2024. $2 million for what we're calling the Arsenal of Innovation, where we want to explore opportunities of innovation around mobility and defense. And so if that gets passed, that's our opportunity to dive into that world, especially because it is a huge area of focus for the state of Michigan. And we do have a defense center as well within MEDC, which we're hiring for right now. But thank you for asking that question, and would love to actually work with you on that once that gets passed and see how we could build that out further.
Yeah, and obviously with my background, there's definitely a very openness from the company to work with the defense market. So we're looking at that, and being in Michigan with the Detroit Arsenal there, and as Brendan was mentioning, that is like the center for all the tactical vehicles and where they design those and build those out. So there's just a nice partnership geographically, from being there. A little bit on our designs and chemistries that we work with, the fact that we're looking at class 3 through 6 trucking, we already have a product in that space that works very well because that fits very well for the kind of size and weight of the vehicles you're talking about when you talk about military vehicles. And then the other aspect that is the chemistry that we're looking at lithium iron phosphate. Again, we're not going to get into that a lot here, but it is a safer chemistry. It's known for that. It's long duration. You don't have to worry about the thermal runaway fires that you've all heard about. With that doesn't happen. You can do the nail penetration test there. That it will steam off. There will be no fires associated with that. And then for the military, that is what they kind of have to use because they leave a lot of these vehicles on ships for long periods of time, and you cannot have thermal runaway incidents on naval ships with a bunch of Army vehicles on there. So it's kind of, we're well positioned to support that industry as it grows and the Biden administration goals as it relates to the military.
Nice. Thanks, Brandon. Any other questions?
This is probably best for those who make batteries, but how do you view the natural resources challenge that is associated with the raw materials that go into electrifying everything as we're talking about? There's some critique, or it seems to me that if we're just switching from oil and gas, which we're having geopolitical fights and everything over today, and we switch over to rare earth minerals like nickel or lithium, those stores of those are in places where people don't like us very much sometimes, or where there's already geopolitical upheaval and there's not enough of them to go around in our current state. So what's being done on the technological front to either change the materials or reduce how much has to go into them. So we're green on that side too.
I'll make a couple comments, and then I think you probably have a lot more to say. So it is certainly a challenge. I would say one of the things that's happening is people are looking at different chemistries, so we don't get stuck on a single place. So LFP is different than NMC or the other technology. Cobalt in particular is really hard to find, so I think the shift toward LFP is positive there. And I think you'll find there'll be other chemistries. The other thing I would say about batteries, which is important to know, is while it creates that same challenge, batteries are fundamentally very recyclable. It can be not so easy, but you can essentially recycle every single thing in a battery. And I think one thing you'll find is as we build out, you'll see that there's an extraordinary effort, and actually there's a lot of funding going in right now to companies that focus on reusing the content of battery to create more batteries, or to reuse batteries, kind of like called second life batteries of a car, et cetera, to where fundamentally it's not a consumable that you've used and lost. You actually can reuse it for a long, long time, and you can recycle essentially everything in it. It's just a matter of getting it to be less and less expensive to do so. So I think it has a very positive aspect there of not just use and have to mine more forever. That's not going to change the fact that as we ramp dramatically, there's going to be a ton of that going on for the next long period of time. But it does have a very long life as a source of energy if recycled appropriately. I don't know what you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, I'll double down on the point of the recycling element of it. I mean, you have a tank of gas, you burn through that, that's it, right? You have to go back and drill that again. The fact that you can, with batteries, reuse that over and over again is a very different way of looking at resources that as we ramp this up, it will change things dramatically on that front. And then, it kind of the macro level, when you look at like the total cost of like impact, all the studies have usually pointed around to like the 40,000 mile, like for your personal car, once you drive about 40,000 miles, your overall like impact on the environment is going to be less going forward, right? Because you've taken all the mining and everything that had to happen up to that point. And we are going to be driving vehicles past that point. So no matter how you want to look at that, from drilling to mining and everything else, the LFP point is a very good thing to kind of, so getting more specific on that. I mentioned before, like the 3 founding principles of Our Next Energy. One of those was like North American supply chain, and by focusing on LFP and not the nickel cobalt chemistries, you're not worrying about cobalt at all. So that's the whole issue that we have with mining in Africa and some of the other resources and costs associated with that. So we're using none of that in our batteries. You do lose energy density when you go away from the nickel cobalt chemistries, and when you focus on the lithium or on the lithium iron phosphate chemistries there. And we've gotten around that by not focusing on a chemistry solution to that. We've fixed that through a systems engineering approach by making our battery packs. So you have energy density at the cell level and the pack level. And by making the energy density at the pack level higher, that's how we've actually made the overall pack that goes in the vehicle perform at a further range than you're getting from the nickel cobalt. And we've demonstrated that repeatedly. So we have introduced a lithium iron phosphate product to the market. You don't have to worry about nickel. You don't have to worry about cobalt. None of the concerns you have there totally can be sourced from North America through better mining practices, and you're going to get more range than you currently have of the current vehicles that are on the market now with the nickel cobalt solutions. So I will just highlight that as where the market's trending towards. And if we're trending to that now, and we keep seeing these investments, and that's without the IRA coming in, and all of the other investments are going to impact that, you'll keep seeing those innovations, which will drive to better solutions there.
Yeah, I think some of the questions are getting at something important, which is just like there are micro trade-offs in service of a longer transition, and there's no getting around that. Like, this innovation is change, which means that like there's disruption, and this is how we grow, is like there's pain involved in growing, right? And so like it's not an excuse, and it's not that people aren't paying attention to all of these additional and external layers of this transition, but I think it's productive to remember the long arc of the transition and where we were and where we're going. I think is I think it's a productive way to be thinking about it, and not saying the questions aren't good and valid. They are, but it's also like we just have to name. Yeah, there's like micro trade-offs in terms of where we want to be 100 years out. Yes.
I have two questions. The first one is about microgrids. Like, what do you guys think about that possibility? We know that solar and wind can only do so much, but we need to see microgrids. And then, where do you guys see nuclear energy going and the role that it's playing in the vision that you guys see for the Midwest?
I can comment on microgrids. I didn't hear the last part of the question.
Yeah.
Oh, nuclear. Okay. I'll have a couple comments, please, there. I think the microgrid technologies are actually becoming more feasible than ever before, in part because of solar and wind, and then storage. Storage is kind of the key missing element that allows people potentially to be off the grid for a period of time. And so I think you're going to see more of opportunities there. I still think it'll be a minor player for a while. I still think most of, you're not going to see people all being able to separate off. I do think there is interesting opportunities in like new communities where they're building in with the combinations of like new home communities with solar, their own independent grid, and then frankly shared storage so that the community can use them together. I think it'll be interesting. We're still a ways away from that being anything dominant, but I think you see more of that. And then, from nuclear, which, again, Generac, we have no presence per se in nuclear. I'll just say from my own perspective, I'm a fan of nuclear because it can give you base load and it really is no emissions. I would argue this is one of the areas where maybe the environmentalism sort of got in their own way years ago by seizing on the problems, and there are problems there. But in the end, frankly, it turned out to be an extraordinarily safe technology and actually is an incredible base load. A lot of challenges with it, frankly, going anywhere. I think the biggest issues there are, NIMBY, right? Nobody wants in their backyard nuclear. It's unfortunate because I think actually, if we had a better base of nuclear, you combine that with wind and solar, you could have a cleaner grid faster if we had a bigger base. It might be too late, frankly, for that. I know there's some work going on in smaller, faster to build nuclear, but it's just such a long and complicated, I think, political thing. It's unfortunate because I actually think of it as it would be great if we had a stronger nuclear base. Hopefully that can change. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just add on the grid comment. Agree with everything Norm said on kind of microgrids and where we're going with those. We just announced the largest industrial microgrid in the world in West Virginia with Berkshire Hathaway. So our new kind of grid, kind of business building out there. The ability to do 12 hours plus of storage, kind of mixed with solar, is a whole new way of kind of leaning forward. And while we may get to more distributed energy, in virtual power plants with solar and kind of storage at the house, at your residential house, that is definitely a trend that's out there. When you think of like these industrial parks, and this one that we announced in West Virginia was for a titanium smelting plants, those things will still need large kind of power generation at that site. So being able to build it out there and not having a power plant halfway across the country or the other side of a state, kind of with the power lines needing to go there, that plant is going to be able to operate 24/7, 365 without any access to the grid, with just the solar and the storage associated with it. So that's a huge trend, and there's lots of other industries across the country that can move down that path. I'll echo the same things. I mean, Ardex Energy has no direct engagement with like the nuclear community whatsoever. I've obviously worked on this on the Department of Defense side. The small modular reactors is a good trend to see that kind of movement, both from a price point standpoint. And I do think just managing kind of where to place and how to manage nuclear kind of going forward, and it's a very good option for us from a baseload perspective. I'll just leave it there.
Cool. Well, great questions, everybody. Thanks so much. I think we'll all be around for the rest of the day or for part of the day, anyways. I appreciate the time and the questions. Have a wonderful day and rest of your South by.